Hello, good evening and welcome to Face the Nation, coming to you live from Stein Studios in Ratmalama. Cowards only find courage in the number of their likeness, citing their lofty strongholds as havens for their impunity. Since 2009, for 10 long years now, Sri Lanka has been a regular feature at the annual sessions of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Many would question why. Many would also ask, why not? What is actually going on in Geneva? What do the various resolutions mean? What does it hold in store for our country? Does it in fact promote reconciliation and harmony? Or is it, as many have claimed, a conspiracy? To sort of wade through all these issues and to resolve the confusion somewhat, we've assembled a panel of three preeminent personalities. We're joined this evening by Mr. Sharminder Ferdinando. He's the news editor of the Island newspaper. Sharminder, thank you very much for joining us on the show once again. We're also joined by Mr. Malinda Seneviratne, a veteran journalist, former editor-in-chief of the Nation newspaper. And we'll be joined later on in the show as well by Dr. Pakiasoti Saranamuthu, the Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. On to our main question for the day, whither Geneva? What is happening in Geneva right now? We know that the President, well, at least the government led by the Prime Minister, plans to co-sponsor a resolution on Sri Lanka. The President has dispatched his own delegation, or has dispatched his own delegation rather, planning to counter the moves being made by the government led by the Prime Minister. And in the meantime, we've seen the opposition leader issuing a statement calling on the government not to betray the country. But what really is going on? We'll start this evening's discussion with Mr. Sharminder Ferdinando. Sharminder, I'm starting with you because I recall around the same time last year you joined us on Face the Nation when we were talking about the goings-on in Geneva and the Human Rights Council resolutions and the agendas of the various parties involved, vested interest, etc., etc. And you said that you'd welcome international investigation simply because it would exonerate Sri Lanka's armed forces. Do you still stand by that position at the 40th session of the Human Rights Council?
Yes, I still believe that we should face this. And there's no point in trying to hide and insist that we cannot face the international judges. First of all, I must correct you that although the President initially declared that he would send his own delegation, subsequently he changed his mind. After having talks with the UNP, he decided that he will not send a separate delegation. Instead, he included his people in a government delegation headed by Foreign Minister Tilak Marapana. So the President actually, I think he succumbed to UNP pressure and gave up his original idea to make representations to Geneva. So this delegation headed by Minister Marapana will not oppose anything. Instead, they will accept and they will ask with the, the government of Sri Lanka and other countries will ask for 2 more years for Colombo to fulfill obligations. In 2015 October, we agreed to fulfill certain obligations. Now we are getting 2 more years to fulfill them. So, at the end, the President and the UNP taking a common stand on this issue, and that's obvious. So thereby, they have agreed to everything, every obligation in terms of the October 2015 agreement, under which we have to set up a hybrid court. Although our politicians, both in and outside Parliament, they repeatedly say that we will not permit foreign judges to come in, we have agreed. And I, as a Sri Lankan, believe there's no point in refusing to accept these facts, and we should accept the 2015 resolution in full and implement everything, including foreign judges, right? But we must also request them to take into consideration all the available information, evidence, and all the revelations made by various people after 2015 October. The whole problem today is the people who demand that Sri Lanka implement 2015 resolution do not accept subsequent revelations made by various people.
What are these subsequent revelations that you're referring
to? In October 2017, the House of Commons, the British Parliament was told that 40,000 people did not die in Sri Lanka during the offensive, the final offensive, and the maximum number was about 5,000. So I think we should fully implement the 2015 resolution, but Geneva must accept the fresh evidence and give us an opportunity to present all evidence there.
Do you feel that this might be, that this endeavor is somewhat disingenuous if it does fail to take into consideration the information or the evidence that you're talking about?
No, you see, now, if you see the recent report presented in Geneva, Geneva has taken into consideration latest situations. Now, it refers to the constitutional coup by the president and the former president Mahinda Rajapaksa, right? So, it refers to various other events. Hana situation, the bones found in Mana. So, if they are prepared to take into consideration such events, such developments, why not what had happened in the British Parliament? I think there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, the government of Sri Lanka is refusing to take up the issue. So there's no point in blaming the international community, the civil society, and other players when the government of Sri Lanka refuses to do so.
Thank you very much, Shaminda. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Pakisodi Saranamuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saranamuthu, before I come to you, I'd first like to go to Malinda Seneviratne, veteran journalist, former editor-in-chief of The Nation newspaper. Malinda, you've been vocal in the past, putting it lightly, on the issue of Sri Lanka's human rights track record. What is your stance at present?
Right, my stance has not changed. You were talking about whether there's this ingenuity in this entire process, and obviously there is. But then there are also realities, as Shamindra correctly pointed out. These are not good people. There are no good people. There are people who have interests, and we have to recognize that. Now, when you take the report that has been submitted in Geneva by the High Commissioner, which refers, as Shamindra said, to various issues that came up recently, including the mass graves in Mana, that has been included in this. I think it was done on the 7th of March, and the carbon dating on that came before that. So if people are going to get excited and emotional about these things without really looking at the facts and and are not serious about what they mean, then we are not going anywhere with that kind of mindset. I think it's about as media people, someone tells us something, we try to verify the story, right? We do the backgrounds and we look at the reliability and so on. So if someone says he said this, and we say, okay, how do you know? They say, well, she said that, and then he says, how did she know? And you keep going back. And then if you end up at an original source that is not reliable, you dump that story, right? But here we have got a mountain of very questionable claims, and based on which all kinds of charges are being leveled at Sri Lanka. What that does is, I think that in any war there are there are all kinds of things that happen, and not all of it is within the framework of what is permissible in terms of conventions and so on. What that kind of thing, this kind of approach does is it takes away the credibility and of investigations that ought to be carried out, because everything can be dismissed. And that's a load of nonsense. So even that which ought to be taken seriously gets shoved under the carpet, and that, I think, is a dangerous thing. So when you talk about the United Nations and UNHRC and what's happening in Geneva over the last 10 years, this is a seasonal thing. Like I didn't come last year, but Shamindra was here. 2023, you might have another program, Face the Nation, and we'll be talking about the same things. But interestingly, what Shamindra said about we should face this. If you have nothing to hide, why not? Even if you have something to hide, let's be open about it. But when you get the Tamil National Alliance dismissing the reports about the carbon dating reports on the Mana skeletal remains, there was a comment on Facebook. Someone said, even if you get international judges and they say that they kind of exonerate the armed forces of any wrongdoing in terms of the kind that they have been charged with, the TNA is not going to accept that. So that is politics. There is this person,
Actually,
Professor...
Excuse me, I'm not aware of the TNA having made such a statement.
It was reported.
It was reported by the island and all the newspapers.
Yeah, and this Professor Trishanta Nanakar said wars are fought in two ways, one in the battlefield and one in the alleyways of memory, which is true. But memory is not a clean, neat thing. It comes through a lens of preferences and preferred outcomes and all kinds of emotional baggage. And there we get, we find ourselves bogged down in a mire and we can't get out of it. How long are we going to keep digging into these things, and how much of that is going to be politicized, which makes it very difficult for us to extricate what really happened. And not only in the last
note, Malinda, I'd like to move to Dr. Saranamuthu. Dr. Saranamuthu, thank you very much for joining us on the show this evening. Malinda asks, how long are we going to keep digging into this? It has been 10 years now. For 10 consecutive years, Sri Lanka has been a main fixture at the UN Human Rights Council sessions in Geneva. Malinda says that in 2023, we'll probably have another episode of Face the Nation, and we'll still be talking about Sri Lanka's human rights track record and possibly another resolution in Geneva. Where do you stand? What is your stance on all this? What is your perspective on this?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think that we should have an extension of Resolution 30/1. And the reason why I say that is twofold. One is that to the extent that we've had anything happening on the human rights front, that the issue is on the agenda of the Human Rights Council has helped quite considerably to keep that pressure, that momentum on. Secondly, if it doesn't get extended this time, Sri Lanka will fall off the agenda of any multilateral institution. This is the only one, in fact, that it is on. And that, I think, would be unfortunate because precisely the point about keeping the pressure, maintaining that kind of influence on the government of Sri Lanka. As to whether we'll be sitting here in 2023, my God, I hope not. But it's not inconceivable. But at the same time, the international community may just lose interest in Sri Lanka. And there will be less of pressure to actually continue with this. And enough would be enough, as it were. I mean, if you look back on 30/1, the problem with 30/1 is that it's not that nothing has happened with regard to it. It's the pace at which things have happened. If you look at the four mechanisms, they weren't supposed to be sequenced in the way that they have been, but you have an OMP set up, you have an office on reparations where the Constitutional Council have got the names and they have to appoint. I understand that with regard to Truth and Reconciliation, the Commission, the legislation was taken by the Prime Minister to Cabinet, but he was told that the President and I think one other minister wanted more time with regard to it. Now, giving back land, all of those kinds of things have happened. The one area in which there is no action as such is that area of accountability. And that is the one, of course, that the people in the North and East will demonstrate about, will go on about, and that is the one that the President and the Prime Minister, soon after we co-sponsored the resolution in October 2015, said that under no circumstances will that be allowed because we will not have foreign judges, etc. They more or less sort of orphaned the consultative task force report on precisely the same grounds in terms of an official endorsement of the whole thing. So accountability still is a major demand as far as the people in the North and East are concerned, but one that the government doesn't seem to want to respond to.
Dr. Saranamuthu, the issue of foreign judges is a key bone of contention among those who vociferously oppose any kind of moves being made in Geneva on Sri Lanka. Is there any way for the government to work around this? Having committed already to the resolution in 2015, which explicitly, quite explicitly, talks about hybrid courts, is there any way that the government can work around this?
Well, I think the question of working around it means what? That the foreign judge will not have any say in the final decision? Is that the argument? Or is it that the foreign judge will not be officially part of the bench, but will be a monitor sitting outside? But all of this has to come in consultation, discussion with representatives of the TNA or whoever is going to represent the people who are demanding that accountability, and I think something could be worked out. But the issue is the government of Sri Lanka willing to accept that the justice system, the law and order system, has malfunctioned, and that is why one is talking about special courts? Because, I mean, as I was secretary of the consultative task force, that was the one point that people came up with. Said, look, if things happened in the way that they were supposed to, you won't be coming here and talking to us.
Dr. Saranamuthu, before I open the floor for questions from our journalists this evening, very quickly, because this is a lot to do, when it comes to these issues, a lot of it has to do with perceptions. There's a public perception that at present in the world, there are numerous human rights crises brewing all across the world. There's a crisis happening in Yemen right now, in Syria, in Palestine, among others. There are many in Sri Lanka who feel that the UN Human Rights, or the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is paying disproportionate attention to Sri Lanka. Do you see any kind of problem there?
No, quite frankly, I don't. This is an issue that has been on the agenda of the Council for, since 2012, when the first resolution on Sri Lanka was passed. Yeah? And because the government of Sri Lanka at that time did not fulfill the promises or commitments made, the resolution became somewhat punitive. But yet, even at the present moment, the Human Rights Council cannot impose any sanctions or anything like that. It doesn't have that power, you know. So as far as I'm concerned, I think, yes, we need these resolutions. We are members of these bodies. We accepted the values on which they are based. This is not being imposed on us. This has come through with a vote, So why can't we come out and make an exception of ourselves? Prove that we are not afraid, we are fairly proud. We have UN peacekeeping, all of that can be cleared up if we come out and say, yes, Maybe there were war crimes committed. Look, let's have an investigation and let's find out. No one is accusing the entirety of the Sri Lankan security forces of war crimes.
Well, the global geopolitical realists, let's call them, would argue that the only reason that Sri Lanka is garnering this proportion of attention at the Human Rights Council is because Sri Lanka, being a moderately less powerful country, or relatively a less powerful country, is an easy target. Whereas there have been accusations that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council itself continues to ignore ongoing human rights violations. I spoke to you about Palestine, where the Israeli Defense Forces have snipers taking out demonstrators.
No, so for me,
what does this say? Because we were talking to Marlinda about whether this process is disingenuous. Is this an example of this process being disingenuous?
Well, it could be from one perspective being disingenuous in that politics, international politics, is about power, and those with power will pursue their own interests. The issue, as far as I see it, is not whether, they are being disingenuous or not. The issue is, are there human rights violations in Sri Lanka? Does Sri Lanka need to do something about it in terms of its unity, in terms of its move towards greater prosperity? Is it not in our interest to do so? Those are the questions that I would ask. Because international politics is always going to be fraught with a hypocrisy, as indeed most politics is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saramuthu. International politics will always be fraught with hypocrisy, but the questions that we need to ask ourselves are, do we need this? On that note, let's go to our journalists this evening. On to my immediate left is Deshan Gonawala, and on my far left, Shehan Ranatunga, joining us for the second time on Face the Nation. Welcome back, Shehan. I'm glad that you've become a regular fixture on the program. Let's start with the younger member on the panel. Deshan, over to you.
Thank you, Nadeem. I want to pose my first question to Dr. Saramuthu. Now, you've seen that in recent times, the president initially made a statement saying that he's going to send his own delegation to request what he did say at the assembly, where he said Sri Lanka can solve its own problems. And then the Prime Minister, representing the government, is sending another delegation headed by the Foreign Minister. However, now, after consultation and much discourse, you've seen that if they've morphed into one delegation headed by the Foreign Minister, consisting of a core group of the President's people. Now, what is the message this gives to the international community? Does it not leave the international community thinking that maybe Sri Lanka should not even be taken seriously, much less given an extension in terms of the times given to fulfill their promises?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very, very peculiar situation in which the government of Sri Lanka has sort of two heads, and it is working at cross purposes. I mean, I think what has happened is that the president is wanting to make statements in Geneva which will be reflected back to his politicking as far as the next presidential election is concerned. Mm-hmm. I don't think he has given any great thought to what reputational impact this would have with regard to Sri Lanka. He is more concerned in sort of saying, look, I have taken the patriotic stand and I have made that case. And I guess now what's going to happen is that you have a delegation which is led by the foreign minister. Mm-hmm. You have a debate, and the foreign minister will make a speech in which he will, enter his concerns. He's already said that there are things in the report that he does not agree with. But just remember, what we're talking about is an extension of 30/1, mm-hmm. and the High Commissioner's report is somewhat different. We're not voting on the High Commissioner's report. So the foreign minister's speech will incorporate some of the president's concerns, and I think that will be it. Because if we are to announce all of a sudden that we are not going to co-sponsor or withdraw our co-sponsorship and force a vote and all of that, then it becomes a very different situation. and it could become very messy indeed. But I think basically the president is acting in terms of reference with regard to the politics in this country rather than international politics.
Mr. Semiratna, I want to move over to you now. The president, as Dr. Saravanuth mentioned, is playing politics to a certain degree when it comes to his aspirations. Now, moving into the larger picture, the bigger picture, you were saying how you feel that this discussion might be held a few years from now as well. In such a scenario, how is it that we as a government can go and make a stand and tell the UNHRC that, look, we have the capacity to solve our own problems, when we are giving mixed signals on a national level or a representative level coming all the way from the top?
That is a serious problem. The generous reading of what President Maithripala Sirisena has said about this issue is that, okay, we can interpret him to be doing some politicking, speaking not to Geneva but to the voters in Sri Lanka and his political future. But what if that is something that had to be said anyway? That is one way of seeing it. But if, as Dr. Saravanuth said, there is problems in we know that international politics is not clean and all that, right? I agree that we need to have our house in order, and if it is not, then we open ourselves to all kinds of attacks from all kinds of quarters. And if our judicial system cannot deliver on serious issues like this, then the correct thing to do is to correct all those flaws. Whether we need some kind of international forces getting involved in that is a different issue.
Can you blame the UNHRC for recommending that we have international...
Well, if there are humbugs, as has been implied, are we going to play into that humbuggery? I don't think we should. But that does not mean that we are not humbugs ourselves if our system is not working. We have seen that the judicial system has failed. Why do we have FCIDs? Why do we have presidential commissions? Which means that the system is not able to cope, right? So I can understand that, but then at some level, you have to address the flaws and get those things sorted out. If not, that allegation will always be made with good intention and with very malicious intent as well. So why open yourself to that? So if you are not going to get our system in order, if you are going to have this kind of political tug-of-war and confusion, which can obviously will not benefit us in any international forum, then we have a serious political problem which has to be sorted out at some level. That's unfortunate, but that's a reality. I don't think that, okay, you have human rights violations. You have the issues of reconciliation and prosperity and so on, which we all want. And we have all kinds of claims which have been inflated at some point. But even inflated claims, we need to investigate, right? And if the allegations are very serious, then the substantiation has to be as serious, and so too the defense of that. Whether we have a mechanism for all that is questionable. I don't think we do. And in that sense, maybe we should go with what Shamindra said, okay, let us open us. Why should we be scared? If, however, there is buffoonery happening, whether we are going to get a reasonable, civilized outcome comes to the question.
Mr. Ferdinando, I want to ask you now, with the mixture of the delegation that has gone and the government, well, according to most of what we hear here at home, are going to co-sponsor another resolution this time around as well. What do you think will happen at the Human Rights Commission this time around?
Sending a delegation to Geneva is a joke, because I'm sure Dr. is aware that we have already signed the document. Our ambassador in Geneva now today, right here today, we are talking about the government of Sri Lanka going to sponsor a resolution. Whereas we are fully aware, in fact I reported it, that our ambassador in Geneva, Ambassador Assis, he has already signed it. So there's no point in sending a delegation to Geneva. That's number one. The government was not to send, Marapana was asked to lead this delegation only after President Sirisena made this, after Sirisena declared that he was going to send his own team, right? So we must understand that we have already signed the document, right? So we have agreed to extend 30 stroke 1 resolution for 2 more years. That's number one. But talking about accountability, I strongly believe we should face this inquiry. And as Doctor pointed out, and he headed, and you were the secretary to that task force, where they recommended.
With international, with the
Yes,
open?
definitely. Because see, if the Tamil people believe that they don't have faith in our system, we must give them confidence. We must invite foreign judges. But as I said earlier, we must have everything before this system. Now, when you talk about accountability, what is the accountability of India, right? I have this book. It's written by the former Indian High Commissioner in Colombo, Dixit, where Dixit admits that India intervened in Sri Lanka deliberately and funded and sponsored terrorism here, because at that time in 80s, India felt that we were getting too close to America and Israel, right? So if the international community, if the Western power really want to investigate, examine the situation in Sri Lanka, let them examine everything. You talk about accountability. What is the accountability of the Tamil National Alliance? The group which in 2001 recognized LTT as the sole representatives of the Tamil-speaking people. What is their responsibility? If the political leadership in Colombo is responsible for war crimes committed by the Sri Lankan armed forces in the north, the TNA too must accept responsibility. What is their responsibility, right? And I think it's, Deshan, we should, the media, the political parties, the civil society should consider everything. In 2010, Honorable Sambandhan urged the Tamil people in North to vote for General Sarath Fonseca. Now, on one side, they accused the Sri Lankan army of killing 40,000 people. The same political party then urged the Tamil people to vote for the commander of the war-winning Sri Lankan army. The people of the North, including the people of Digamadulla, then voted for him. If you check the results, General Fonseca polled the highest, right? So take all these factors into consideration. Just don't talk about what had happened between 2006. Now, basically, today we are talking about what had happened between January and May 2009. Discuss the whole issue. And I still believe whatever happens, with all the information, everything available to us and the international community, the foreign judges, that's a must.
Mr. Ferdinando, if I may just follow up with what you just said. For a long time, particularly since the previous government, the international community has been crying out, as we've already spoken, saying that there are war crimes committed and all of that. And then we had the change in government with the change in president, and the new government then came into the picture. And one of the signatures of the current government has been the appointment of commissions and investigations carried out over various allegations. So my question is, why is it that this particular issue has not been investigated here in Sri Lanka itself?
Which one?
The allegations with regard to war crimes.
No, the previous government, the former president Rajapaksa appointed LLRC, but the international community did not accept that. And the previous government made a huge mistake when the Darusman committee gave us an opportunity to make representations to them. We refused to cooperate with them. Thereby, we failed to provide them with information that could have helped us. Now, as an example, I can tell you, in June 2011, 2 years after the war, the US Defense Advisor in Colombo declared war crimes did not take place, and I was also there. There was this question raised by a former Indian army officer, very senior officer. It was posed to Major General Shavindra Silva, and the US Defense Advisor intervened, and he said war crimes did not take place. The man was moved out of Sri Lanka, and our story was denied by the State Department. The US Embassy in Colombo did not say anything. So, but the former President Rajapaksa's government between 2011 and 2015, during that period, 4 years, they never used that information. So those who blame this government for not taking up issues in Geneva should also blame the previous government.
Dr. Sarangamuthu, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, right along the way, you will find that each government hasn't done what it was supposed to do and therefore muddied the waters. That is why, you know, I feel very strongly that the only way to deal with these allegations and counter-allegations and all of that is to go for the investigation, you know, to go for the investigation and come clean. We are a sovereign country. In the course of that civil war, there might have been elements of the security forces who engaged in practices that they ought not to have. We need to find that out. We need to tell the victims that this is what happened to their loved ones. And we need to close that chapter. Otherwise, this is going to be a perennial accusation against the armed forces of this country.
Well, we can try that. I mean, we can't really predict what kind of closure is acceptable. But I agree with now, Dr. Sarangamuthu was talking about the OMP, Office of Reparations, and the Truth and Reconciliation, and the key issue of accountability. This is not a war that started in January 2009 and ended in May 2009. As Shamindra said, if you want to talk about accountability, how can certain kinds of death be more important than other kinds of death for investigation, for investigative purposes? How can the grief of some people be important and not the other people? People who died in that period, and I'm not talking about Sinhalese or Tamil, but everyone. From 1975 onwards, I don't know how many people have been killed, but every act where there is questions about wrongdoing, whether it was extrajudicial killing, indiscriminate bombing, exploding claymore mines, or suicide bombers. This is a long war. If you want to go, you go the entire. Why are we not talking about, for example, 88, 89?
Should we be talking about? Let me try and put some, because if you're going to take Sri Lanka's post-independence history and ethnic violence, extrajudicial killings, the operation of paramilitaries and mob violence, etc., you can go as far back as 1958, maybe even pre-independence, but to various issues. But should we be looking at a macro picture, or should we just be dealing with each case as it crops up?
Can I just intervene for a moment? But that is precisely why the Office on Missing Persons is not time barred.
It's not time barred.
It's it looks at the entire history of the country.
Right. On that note, Dr. Sarangamuthu, just very quickly before we go in for a break, there's a lot of talk recently, well, since it was the most recent discovery and because of how news cycles work, the Mannar mass grave was featured prominently. The Office of Missing Persons worked on the excavations there, on the exhumation there. Remains were sent for carbon dating. Initial tests that, or rather the carbon dating tests, came back claiming that the remains found there were centuries old. But many people in Sri Lanka at present seem to have forgotten that several years ago, another mass grave was discovered in the environs of the Matale General Hospital. There were claims that the remains of the 150 skeletal remains found there came from the period of the insurrections in the 80s. But that chapter has not been closed either. Are we just jumping from chapter to chapter without any kind of closure? Does it seem to you that the Office of Missing Persons is paying more attention to one mass grave than to the other?
No, I wouldn't say that, because the Office of Missing Persons has only just got started. And because of the Mannar mass grave, they took sort of overall responsibility with regard to it. But the Office of Missing Persons is not going to provide any quick fixes for anyone, because if it is going to do its job and do it properly, it has to get the technical expertise, the forensic, all of that has to be in place before they can do. And they have got something like 20,000 odd files already with them on persons who are missing. So it's going to take time as far as that's concerned. But yes, what we do not have, and this is the problem, what we do not have is factored into the so-called policy of reconciliation, the transitional justice component, where it is seen as pivotal to reconciliation, where you have a proper plan in terms of what you are going to be looking at. You know, we don't have that. And that's the thing. And that's why we go back to this whole question of, look, did they come up with all this, sequence it, and tick a box for Geneva?
Thank you, Dr. Saramuthu. On that note, we're going for a quick commercial break. Question to think over before we join you again. Is transitional justice crucial to the reconciliation process? We'll try to find an answer to that question in the next round. Welcome back to Face the Nation. If you're just joining us, we're having a very interesting discussion surrounding Sri Lanka and the Human Rights Council in Geneva and the current processes that are underway and the machinations that are underway there. It's said that without justice, the most heinous crimes go unpunished, victims are unable to obtain redress, and peace remains an elusive goal, since impunity generates more hatred, leading to acts of revenge and more suffering. Sharminder, is this true of Sri Lanka? Do you feel that, you've been covering this process since 2009. I've read many articles that have been written by you in this 10-year period, covering this entire saga, let's call it. Given what we have seen happening in Sri Lanka in the recent past, do you feel that there is a culture of impunity that is feeding the continued sort of outbursts of violence that we see today?
In 1971, then 1987, 1990, then the war with the LTT. So, during conflicts, wars, armed forces of a country take certain actions, right? Now, if I say that we did not do any wrong, people will not take me seriously. So, things happen. Things happen, and there's no point in denying that fact, that certain crimes, were committed. And we should accept that, right? But we must take all evidence into consideration. Right now, the 30/1 was based on certain allegations made by the Tamil community, the international community, the civil society, various sources, right? So these allegations were that the Sri Lankan armed forces killed 40,000 people between January and May 2009. The armed forces deprived medicine, food, and other essential items to the Tamil people in the north, and so they were the main allegations, and the armed forces were also accused of deliberately targeting hospitals in that area, and such attacks, they claim, caused the deaths of 40,000 people. The Darusman report says it, but at the same time, during the same period, the Amnesty International put out this book. It says only 10,000 died. The British Parliament was told during the same period 100,000 people died. So the international community, the government of Sri Lanka, the civil society, all the interested parties should try to ascertain a correct figure. It cannot be 100,000 in the UK Parliament, 10,000 for the Amnesty International, and 40,000 for the Darusman report, right? So we need to establish these facts. Now, I'll tell you a very interesting thing. Now, this government, this Jahapalana government, for a time, from morning to night, they were talking about Right to Information Act, right? Now, NASB used the British law in 2014, November, to obtain information from the British Foreign Office. Now, British Foreign Office released documents sent by the British High Commission in Colombo between January and May 2009. There, they estimated number of people dead, maximum at 8,000. Right now, we must ask the British government whether they are prepared to furnish all these documents to Geneva. Right? If they are so keen, if they are so interested. Now, recently in Mana, we had the German ambassador visiting. It was followed by the British High Commission delegation. If these people are really keen, they can submit all their documents, dispatches from Colombo High Commissions and embassies to Geneva, during that period, right? Because when Lord Naseby requested for those documents, they refused. For more than 2 years, he sought the help of the Information Office. After their intervention, they released some sections, right? In October 2017. Now, why can't they examine those evidence? If they are prepared to examine everything else, the Geneva referred to the constitutional coup, committed by President Sirisen and the former president. If they are prepared to examine everything, why don't they simply examine the British records, the American records? They refuse to do so because they know 40,000 Tamil people did not die in Sri Lanka. That's the whole issue. Nadeem, we are discussing everything. We are talking about accountability. We are talking about OMP. We are talking about rights of Tamil people, the Muslims, and various other issues. Whereas, I am telling you, the resolution co-sponsored by this government in October 2015 was based on lies.
Dr. Saranamuthu, Mr. Shaminda Fernando says that the resolution of 2015 on Sri Lanka was based on lies. Recently, the United States of America withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council, calling it a cesspool of political bias. Given these allegations against the Council itself and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, can we be guaranteed, as Malinda referred to it in the previous segment of the show, that any investigation on Sri Lanka or into Sri Lanka's armed forces, to quote Malinda, will be without buffoonery?
Well, I mean, to begin with, the investigation that has been called for into the allegations of war crimes, etc., is not to be conducted by the Human Rights Council in Geneva. The resolution 30/1 calls upon the government of Sri Lanka to have this investigation with the proactive participation of foreigners. And the last one, of course, is where the problem arises as to whether foreigners should have the right to be on a judicial mechanism or whatever with regard to Sri Lanka. So, at the end of the day, therefore, the whole question of what actually happened, should the Human Rights Council be looking at Anton Gash's stuff that Lord Naseby has got hold of, etc., I don't think that that's the place to do it. I think that if the government of Sri Lanka decides on an investigation, then that investigation should bring in all of this that is available and also talk to the people in the diaspora who are the ones who are making a lot of the allegations and providing the evidence with regard to the allegations of war crimes. All of that should come in. You see, if the government of Sri Lanka decides on the investigation, takes control of the investigation, then the issue of sovereignty and all of that is moot as far as I'm concerned. We are then in control. It's not the Human Rights Council, it's not Britain, it's not America, it's we who are doing it. And we are in control. However, though, we've had instances where we've had foreigners who have been associated with mechanisms looking at human rights violations in this country. And you would remember the International Independent Group of Eminent Persons. It was headed by a former Chief Justice of India. And what did they say when they left? What did he say when he left? He said that the government of Sri Lanka showed no commitment to search for the truth. Now, we can't have an investigation of that kind, because that's just not going to wash. You know, it is, I mean, justice has to be done and justice has to be seen to be done. You know, at the end of the day, that's what's important.
I'll stop your time there because I'd like to move to Malinda actually to ask about this question. Dr. Saranamuthu contends that if the government of Sri Lanka, if Sri Lanka, or if the state rather, takes control of this process, then the whole point of sovereignty is moot. Do you agree with that contention?
I have issues with these eminent people. You know, someone could be eminent in certain spheres and certain time periods, but they have to operate on the kinds of information that they get and the people whom they talk to, which is also political. But if we take control, it's good, right? If we have foreign judges, what is to stop people like Darusman being involved in, right? But as Shamindra said, on the other hand, if we actually engaged with Darusman in a different kind of that panel headed by Darusman, we might have we might have got a different kind of report to look at from that group. So all kinds of things are at play here. But when you're talking about transitional justice, when you're talking about reconciliation and all that, you can't ignore all that has happened post May 2009. Over 500 child soldiers were immediately returned to their families. Over 90% of those who surrendered or were arrested during that last period of time were rehabilitated, which means they were given certain kinds of vocational training, they were allowed to sit exams, they were allowed to have prepare for exams and sit exams, and they were reintegrated into society. Roads, hospitals, schools, landmines have been cleared, people who are displaced have been resettled. There are issues that remain about demilitarization and things like that, you know, returning of private lands, which takes time. Not everything happens at the speed at which Washington wants or whoever wants. We take all that as part of transitional justice. I think that all that is part of it because we have got to return to normalcy. And in that, what happened to someone who died, someone who disappeared, if that's a question for any person, that has to be addressed. I think that has to be addressed, and we should have a decent, acceptable mechanism to do so. But if you're going to politicize all that, you're not going to get the outcome you want. If you're going to, like what happened in the whole Manna Musgraves fiasco, if I may call it, all the ambassadors rushed there. Why? There's a story here. You know, finally we have something. 400 years ago, right? 400 years ago. They will pick up Balangoda man and say that it's Prabhakaran. They will go to Ibankatu and say this is the military high command of the LTT. All kinds of things. I'm just putting it in a very crude kind of way. But we are always going to have that politics. We are always going to have that politics, and I think Dr. Saranamuthu is right. Governments have not been serious about both this regime and the previous regime and the various factions of this particular regime. They have not been serious about the issues of accountability. You know, why cannot we be? If we are sovereign, as Sarah said, we should be able to, but do we have to? Because at the end of the day, if the system of investigation and justice and the overall bird's eye view of the international community's moral eye is going to be skewed, we are going to get screwed anyway, right? We are going to get screwed anyway. And we can talk till the cows come home about the inconsistency of the UNHRC and lack of moral authority of the people who are leveling allegations. Those are givens. But if the governments do not want to listen to the people, if those who are aggrieved are not willing to have closure, which I think is what we are seeing from the side of the TNA in terms of what they have said about the carbon dating, then we are not going to. We can, in the alleyways of memory, we can fight forever, right? We are not going to get justice. We are not going to get transition justice. We are not going to get reconciliation. The other problem about reconciliation, which is a much abused word, as was peace in a different time period during the ceasefire agreement, is people define these things in terms of an outcome they want. Maybe a federal state, maybe a devolution of power that goes beyond the 13th Amendment. Okay, you have already said that this has to be what reconciliation is all about. So let's discuss the process of how to get us there. Where you are not thinking of these things in terms of a process, in terms of a discussion, negotiation, and hammering out of things, substantiation of claims, filling out the exaggerations, and then you come to the outcome that makes sense. If you're not interested in that kind of serious politics, then you're not interested in reconciliation.
Dr. Saramuthu, what is reconciliation all about in Sri Lanka right now? Where you see it, what is the end goal? What is the vision when we talk about multiple reconciliation processes?
I see reconciliation in terms of a relationship between two or more than two sides, where that relationship was founded on mutual interests, but over a period of time, things have been done by both sides to sour that relationship and take it in the direction of conflict. Now the conflict is over, but there is still a strong feeling on both sides that they have to live together, that they are interdependent, and therefore they have to come together to prevent a recurrence of what happened in the past. Yeah, that is important. So, as people did say to us...
Is there that kind of universal feeling? Because there are some who would argue that, is there that feeling among the different groups that they need to live together, they need to figure out a way to live together, or are we seeing instead increased polarization and the emergence of groups from within the multiple communities?
I think you will always
which are talking about isolationism.
I think you'll always get extremist groups in every community. But I do not for a moment ever believed, and I didn't believe it throughout the war, that the Tamil people of this country wanted a separate state. I do not believe that. And at the present moment, I do not believe that either. Now, there are extremists who might get up and sort of talk about it in various ways, but the majority of the people recognize that, look, we are interdependent, but we also want our autonomy. And that is the ultimate objective, if you like, in terms of the reconciliatory process, whereby you come to a situation where both sides acknowledge what they have done wrong to create that situation, and now to move forward and make sure that it never happens again.
Shamindra, I'd like to, we were talking about the macro sort of picture, and Dr. Saramuthu was talking about the importance of self-determination and autonomy. We can't deny that there have been problems throughout our post-colonial history, dating back to immediate post-independence and the Citizenship Act, which disenfranchised an entire community of Sri Lankans, whose descendants are today fighting for a 1,000 rupee daily wage, going on to the Sinhala Only Act and various other incidents, let's call them, that have occurred in our past that breed or that sort of fuel this environment of mistrust and hatred. Throughout your years as a journalist, throughout your long career as a journalist in Sri Lanka reporting on these issues, what have you seen as the key sort of factors that prevent coexistence?
As long as the LTT enjoyed the military power, they were not interested in peace. The word reconciliation was not discussed in this country until the LTT was defeated. That's the truth, right? Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, I believe, is the only Sri Lankan leader who made a genuine effort, even at the expense of his political future, to come to some sort of arrangement with the LTT. The LTT felt that it was his weakness, and the LTT withdrew from the peace talks in April 2003 and created a situation where they helped Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to win the 2005 presidential election. The whole idea was to go for an all-out war and to defeat the Sri Lankan army within 2 years. In fact, I raised this issue with Kumaran Padmanathan when he was arrested and brought here. And he sort of indicated that they were sure of defeating the Sri Lankan army within 2 years to push the army back up to Anuradhapura, southwards of Vavuniya. So see, the military power, when they had the military power, when they felt that they could achieve anything, they tried their best. That is why Honorable Sumandiran was not there at that time, and the other TNA leaders got together, and in 2001, October, I believe, they declared the LTT as the sole representatives of Tamil-speaking people. So when you talk about accountability, what had happened after that, I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I'm not sure of the term, they should inquire into all these aspects. Why TNA felt that the LTT should be recognized as the sole representatives of the Tamil-speaking people?
The motivations, you're saying?
Pardon?
Their motivation for...
Yes, because they felt the LTT could deliver, right? Right up to January, February 2009, the diaspora, the Western diplomatic community, they felt the LTT still could defeat the army. And my friend who lives in Canada, DBS Jaraj, he did a piece in December 2008 where he said that the LTT had a very strong army based in Mullaitivu and the army would be defeated. He was so sure.
That was Iqbal.
Not Iqbal, DBS Jaraj. So, but I mean, coming back to this, Nadeem, I must tell you, the resolution co-sponsored by Yahapalana government in October 2015 was based on lies. I say it again. Because see, this is the UN report which was put out in March 2011, where the UN says the number of civilians and LTT killed in the 1 according to the UN, 7,721 killed and 18,000 wounded. Now, can you believe this? Then they say in a document that was never released. Now, they refuse to release their own report because...
Why is it that we see so many conflicting figures when it comes to the numbers of, when it comes to the casualties in the final stages? Why is it that we...
And here they also say this information contained in this report cannot be checked, verified for 20 years. Now, can you believe it? Now here, a sovereign government, the state of Sri Lanka, we are accused of killing 40,000 Tamil people, some say 100,000, others say 8,000, various figures.
40,000 Sri Lankan citizens.
Yes, citizens, right? Then the same people say, you cannot inquire into this, you cannot question these people, you cannot verify, check. Nothing for 20 years, 2 decades.
Dr. Sarunmuthu, care to shed some light?
Yeah, I think with regard to that information, the argument is that yes, we will give it to an independent investigation, but what we will not do is publicly release them. The question about why there are so many figures, I suppose, is because of the variety of sources. It's an odd thing. No? We said that there was at one point, the argument was that it was a war without reporters. Yeah, that there was a complete ceiling on the question of reporting from the battlefield. But then on the other hand, you have so many sources who have come out and given information with regard to fatalities, injuries, all of that kind of thing. So I think it's partly because of that, at the end of the day, that there are so many sources, and depending on which side you talk to, some may well be exaggerating, some may well be not exaggerating, but giving lower figures. But that is why, I mean, the only way to get this out is to have a full-blown investigation, you know, and keep it as independent as possible and accept whatever it comes out with.
Thank you, Dr. Saramuthu. We'll move on now to questions. Is an independent and impartial investigation possible when it comes to the various conflicting interests of the political groups involved here in Sri Lanka? Let's start the second round of questions with Shehan Ranatunga.
Touching on this matter of investigations again, because as we said earlier, the issue of foreigners coming in is the biggest problem after. It suggests that our judicial system is not impartial. There's a problem there. But yet we often see civil society representatives constantly talking about how our judiciary is impartial, it's doing well, and it's successful. So is there a problem there? Is that why we need to bring someone in?
Well, I mean, I think there is a problem. The reason why sections of civil society talk about the independence and the impartiality of the judiciary is because of the decisions made in respect of the coup. And those may well be standalone decisions. They may well be decisions that are dependent upon certain people having to make them, and not with regard to the independence and the impartiality of the institution of the judiciary. So I think the jury's out.
Now, in order for things like the hybrid court and so on to happen, doesn't there also have to be a change in the constitution? It can't simply just happen, right? Mustn't it go to parliament? Isn't the vote?
You don't need to change the constitution. You just bring the legislation in.
It's in parliament, yeah.
Yeah, no, it is parliament. You have to bring in.
No, actually, I just want to add something. There, Doctor, you know, in June 2016, and you can check this, the Tamil National Alliance office of Mr. Sambandan, they issued a statement, and we carried it, where they quoted, Honorable Subandhiran as having said in America, that the government of Sri Lanka and the US and the TNA agreed to set up a hybrid court. And Subandhiran said that there was no hindrance by the Constitution. So he's a constitutional lawyer. I mean, he knows it.
No,
so the government
you don't. That's right. You don't require a constitutional amendment. You may just require ordinary legislation.
No, actually, what Subandhiran, Honorable Subandhiran said was that the government of Sri Lanka agreed to set up a hybrid court in 2016, June.
Yeah, but it may well have required bringing in the necessary legislation to ensure
not a constitutional amendment, but a small
amendment. Exactly. Yeah.
Mr. Senaviratna, I want to pose this question to you. Now, in the face of the governmental issues that are currently popping up in Geneva with regard to the confusions there, you also see a large number of civil society groups representing what they call the national interests that stand for the armed forces. Of course, I don't have to mention there are a number of individuals who are taking a stand. They've been to Geneva multiple times with regard to this. Now, do you feel that they are doing the job of the government in standing for the forces?
Well, those who were doing the other job, were they doing the work of the LTT, right? But anyone can do that. I mean, you go to Geneva in those sessions, there are all kinds of side events happening, and anyone can, there's a mechanism through which you can actually have your own discussion on the side.
It's a costly operation.
Costly operation, yes, you need money. But I just want to touch on something that was brought up earlier about the Sinhala only and removing citizenship and all those things. Yes, there were certain things that were corrected. Both of those things were corrected, and also we should not forget that Tamil communalism came not only after not after 1956. There were Selvanayagam was before that, and Hindu revivalism predates Anagarika Dharmapala. So we can't we have to decide where we want to start history from. So we have to take into account all these things. But since we are talking about reconciliation and commonality, and what Dr. Saramunathu said, that when people really have kind of more or less figured out that we have to coexist. We have to, but when you say we don't want Elam, we want devolution, we want self-determination and autonomy, what are the boundaries that you're talking about? What are the demographic factors that you're talking about? Almost 50% of the Tamil people live outside the north and east. So there are issues like that about the traditional homelands and things like that, which you have to talk about. So whether autonomy to some random lines drawn by some white man, so many years ago will sort out issues, I'm not sure. But when you talk about reconciliation and commonalities, what we really miss out is the common suffering, not from the armed forces or militant groups, but multinational companies, how seed companies, chemical, fertilizer companies poison us and impoverish us. There are mechanisms that are global which impoverish all communities, the majority of these communities. And that commonality we don't talk about. No one talks about it. If we really wanted reconciliation, and if we wanted a platform where we talk about things that are shared by various communities, there's a rich,
Malin, will various communities be willing to talk about these issues of commonalities or the common issues that they face if those communities in turn feel that problems that are somewhat endemic to them are not being given due consideration?
Yeah, I suppose if I have a problem, and if I can dress it in ethnic clothes.
Let's say, for example, we're talking about self-determination and autonomy. Do you feel like you were talking about haphazardly drawn boundaries by some foreigner? Yeah. But do you feel that self-determination, autonomy is a necessity?
Of course.
Let's say at local government level.
Of course.
Where it's simply a matter of accessing public services.
Where is the self-determination for you and me? Or can we determine our lives in any decent kind of way? Not that we can do whatever we want. But if we want to stretch that concept, let's take it. Let's take it. Why stop at the provincial boundary, as you said, right? What are the issues, the problems, the grievances that cannot be resolved through decentralization? Right? Why can't we go from provincial devolution to districts or even to the Gram Sabha level, if you want to, if you're really serious about it, right? So I think a lot of things are being fudged in the whole discourse of devolution and self-determination and all that. And we forget, we leave out the issues of class, we leave out the issues of capitalism and the disenfranchisement that occurs in various ways, but that we don't talk about. And the 1,000 rupees for estate, that is horrendous. And it's not only the estate workers, right? It's not only the estate workers who are getting a bad deal in this whole system. What about the right of self-determination of workers, peasants?
Dr. Saramunathu, the 13th Amendment is not really discussed as broadly anymore. Provincial councils are seen by some to be a necessity towards a national solution, and by others to be merely white elephants that are incapable of carrying out the duty of governing the individual provinces. Where or in which direction should the process of devolution and autonomy and self-determination go in Sri Lanka? Do you feel there's a case to be made for going to the smallest, the lowest rung of government, local government?
No, I personally believe that the principle of subsidiarity, whereby people deal with their problems and try to resolve them at the lowest level possible, and what they cannot do at that level goes to a higher level. I think that's the best way to go. Now, with regard to the 13th Amendment, I guess the 13th Amendment keeps coming up because it is the only document that we really have with regard to provincial devolution, and a document that was designed as in some way a political resolution of this conflict. Now, there are all sorts of issues with the 13th Amendment. At one level, there are the issues with regard to its non-implementation in terms of land and in terms of police powers. And then there are the questions with regard to the powers of the government, the concurrent list, all of those. So it needs to be put on the table and discussed in terms of as to whether it is a resolution of the conflict. But I just want to add one thing. We have, at the Center for Policy Alternatives, which I head, we have on 2 occasions done an evaluation of the 13th Amendment in terms of provincial devolution all around the country. And I kid you not, if you talk to the chief ministers outside of the North and East, all you have to do is to take out the words North and East, and you have the same complaints and grievances as those in the North and East have with regard to that system of government and governance. So the 13th Amendment is very clearly inadequate. It's inadequate and it needs to be put on the table, and we need to ask ourselves, do we not need to go beyond it, or do we need to push it aside and think of a new system?
Thank you very much, Dr. Saranmuthu. We're running short of time. We'll go for a quick commercial break. When we return, it'll be the final round. Welcome back to the program. It's the final round of Face the Nation tonight. We've been talking about human rights, Sri Lanka, Geneva, and the resolution that is now before the 40th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. I'd like to start off this final round with Malinda Seneviratne. Malinda, where do we go from here? What is the next step? Is the international investigation that will be, or the independent investigation, hybrid investigation, is that will be a component of the resolution? Is that the way forward? Why or why not? Very quickly.
Quickly, we're talking about provincial councils. Elections have not been held. 6, no one is complaining about it. Regarding the future, I think the key word is ownership. We have to take ownership of our lives, our nation, and I don't believe that people we are forced to elect care about us or our country. And I think at some level we need to think of politics in a different kind of way and figure out systems where we are truly represented by people, or we get to talk about our self-determination and our grievances and aspirations in a wholesome, effective kind of way, instead of having our lives being bartered by people who have personal political objectives and political parties that are thinking about power and not about the people of this country. I think that ownership is the key, and until such time that we devise a system where the people of this country can take ownership of the present and the future, designing of the future, we will get a mess. We will have this mess continuing quickly.
Thank you very much, Malinda Seneviratne. I'd like to now quickly move on to Shamindra Ferdinando, news editor of The Island. Shamindra, you've already stated your position that you feel that, an investigation, if it is impartial and independent, will end up exonerating Sri Lanka or the Sri Lankan state in its campaign against the LTTE. Say that such an investigation takes place. You said that the 2015 resolution 30/1 was based on a lie. Is there any way where you envisage where it can be rectified going forward?
Nadeem, now it's obvious this government will not do so, right? With this delegation, no, first of all, I must tell you, we have already signed the document, right? So there's no point in sending a delegation at the taxpayer's expense and waste more money because we have already signed it, number one. I think in addition to the war crimes probe targeting the Sri Lankan armed forces, I think the international community, a section of the international community, they're using a Geneva resolution to put pressure on Sri Lankan political parties, put pressure on the parliament to accept a new constitution, right? If you examine the Geneva documents, there was this statement made by the former human rights chief Hussein, where he referred to a new constitution. Now, I don't think the Human Rights Council has any right, any reason to get involved in making of a new constitution for our country, right? But unfortunately, all the political parties in parliament, they have failed to represent the interests of the people. They are playing politics, both sides. The former president's party as well as those in power, they are playing a very dangerous game, jeopardizing our safety and security, thereby allowing the foreigners to intervene. And I think at the next national level elections, the people of this country will take a closer look before voting.
Thank you very much, Sharminder Ferdinando. Dr. Saranamuthu, the Human Rights Council itself is currently facing a lack of trust from the global south, from third world countries, and even from traditional supporters of the mechanism, including the United States, or at least the current administration in the United States. In this kind of an environment, how successful would a HRC resolution be in advancing or promoting human rights and accountability in Sri Lanka?
Well, I mean, to begin with, it's not that the global south is against the HRC. The United States is, and has called it a cesspool of etc. And that is largely because of the attitude towards Israel. The HRC attitude towards Israel is not one that Israel likes or the United States likes. And that's the reason why it has pulled out. It pulled out before, and it has now pulled out again, as it were. The issue with regard to the effectiveness and the credibility of the HRC resolution is going to depend entirely on those who support it and how the government of Sri Lanka reacts towards it. The press in this country have kept on talking about a resolution against Sri Lanka since 2012. The HRC resolutions are not against Sri Lanka. Is the government of Sri Lanka going to be sponsoring resolutions against Sri Lanka? No. It is a resolution on Sri Lanka. The 2012 resolution asked the government of Sri Lanka to implement the recommendations of the LLRC. It's because they didn't do that we went to 13, 14, and then eventually to 15. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we need this extension. And we need to see this extension not just as buying time, but to finish what we said we were going to do in 2015. Then 2 years from now, we may not have another resolution. We may not need another resolution, and that, after all, is the optimum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saranamuthu, Dr. Pakiswati Saranamuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Thank you very much, Malinda Seneviratne, veteran journalist, former editor-in-chief of the Nation newspaper. And thank you very much, Sharminder Ferdinando, also a very senior journalist and currently news editor of the Island newspaper. Gentlemen, I hope very much that we will not be meeting again in 2023 to discuss the same topic. Thank you very much, Deshan Gonawala and Shehan Ranatunga, for posing your questions to our panel tonight. Before I leave you, a quick thought, something to think about. It was reported in several Sunday newspapers that over the past 10 years, the taxpayer has coughed up 2.3 billion rupees to sustain the commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption. In that time, the Siabok has not successfully prosecuted the corruption case of more than 10 million rupees. Can you think of any corruption scandals in the past 10 years that have amounted to more than 10 million rupees? I bet you can. With that, I'd like to leave you with a quote. The truly powerful feed ideology to the masses like fast food, while they gorge themselves on the rarest of delicacies, impunity. Good night and good luck.